Welcome to Behind the Door Podcast, another episode. Got my man, my good friend here, Jeremy Hiltz, my brother, here to do another episode for everybody. Thanks for listening. You know, we ended our last episode, like, we had a hard conversation, you know, like, it's something that we've been ongoing talking about, and I think, honestly, for us, when we're talking about anything in the system, if there's something that has, like, captivated our interest and, like, something that we're struggling with or unpacking together, that's when we typically know that we're kind of on to something, because we've spent literally most of our lives thinking about these things. And so, you know, this episode, for everybody who's listening, we're going to get into the idea of, you know, transformation again, but like with a really specific question, which is like, is everybody transformable? Is everybody redeemable? And I'll just start by saying, I know a lot of people in the world who believe that the answer to that question is yes, that there is no human being who has committed any type of wrong, any egregious type of wrong, who's not redeemable. I don't think that people think it just happens. I think that, they believe that it's just possible. It takes hard work. It takes the perfect combination of things. But in our conversations, this is something that we've talked about that, you know, in some ways we agree on, but in some ways we disagree on. And, you know, for you, Jeremy, with your clinical background and, you know, with the work that you do, you've got some really good and important insights for people to hear about, you know, why maybe everybody's not transformable. And then what does that mean? What do we do in those cases? So, I'll just start by asking you the question, do you think everybody's transformable?
Well, I think that there's things that happen in the psychology of people. Mm-hmm. In their brains, the pathology of people, right? They've done studies on mass murderers' brains, right? And like there's similarities between all of them. You know, you look at like a guy like Aaron Hernandez who had CTE, and there was no. That's not reversible. You know what I mean? Like there's no plan. There's nothing that's gonna change that piece of them. You know what I mean? And then you start thinking about if somebody is transformable, but what's the risk if they're not?
Yeah.
And then it turns into like, okay, what's a life, a quality of life? It becomes like a quality of life issue at some point. You know what I mean? Like. Can somebody be transformed in a confined setting?
Yeah.
And that's like the best that they're gonna be. You know what I mean? Like that's the best society. This is the best we can do here in this moment. You know what I mean? And then there's like these heinous acts. And it's like almost crimes against humanity. You know what I mean? Where you go, is this like? How do you come back from that? You know what I mean? Like a guy just came up and, you know, we're in Lewiston and a guy just came up and shot up 2 places and you know, he ended up taking his own life. But like what, you know what I mean? Like where, how does that like, how do you come back from a situation like that? You know what I mean? Like there's no, to me in my mind, there's no coming back from that. Like you did this, you crossed the line that you're capable of crossing. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you might not get a chance to come back into society after that. You know what I mean? Because you're unsafe for people who can't understand how that works. Like some of the things that happen, I was like locked up with people, and you know, actually when I was doing D time at the Supermax, I would read law books because there was no you could only read the Bible or you could read law books, appeals, like cases, you know. And so I had a lot of time out there, so I would just read the law books and I would read the appeals and I would read the cases and I would see what was really going on. And then I get on population, I would see that person that I read the whole case and I'd be like, and then you can actually see it inside. Like you can start seeing it. You can see the personality and it, like the control, the power of control is still present. You know what I mean? Like that piece of them is still there. And how do you just go, okay, time's up. It's time to go out and back out into society now, and because we all want to feel better about that we didn't lock you up forever. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, the system's broken and all this stuff, but like at the end of the day, man, there's safety issues that need to be addressed first and foremost, because when it all boils down to it, Brandon, my family is the most important thing. You know what I mean? The safety of my son and my daughter. You know what I'm saying? Like my kids. Without, they're the most. You know what I mean? So it's like everything is. It's like, how can I make my family better? How can I make my community better? Right? But like, if it comes that, you know what I mean? Like, you start talking about those safety issues, and you go, no, it's not worth the risk to me. You know what I mean?
Well, that's when I first started really thinking about this issue, like while I was in prison, you know, like getting into like my, you know, studies and like starting to develop like a more critical understanding of how flawed our system is. And like, I remember when I learned about the idea of abolition for the first time, it like really didn't sit with me well, because I was like, man, I got guys in the pod that I live in that I don't want out there. And I don't want, you know, I think I said it in the last episode, like, I don't want them being my sister's neighbor, a guy who has heinously raped multiple women, and I live with him in prison, and everything that comes out of his mouth is derogatory towards women. There's clearly no change or transformation that's happened there. He's not even remorseful about what he's done. And, you know, like you said, I started framing it in the idea of like, I want the people that I love to be safe, and I don't want to have to go to sleep every night wondering when they're going to become victims, because we live in a society where it's so common. But at the same time, I, you know, like where I struggle with it, and like it'll be good to get more into like the science that you're talking about, because like, you know, do I think that everybody who's done a heinous crime like that, every single one is you know, has this brain dysfunction or chemical imbalance or uncurable, untransformable aspect of them? I don't think everyone does.
I think it's a small percentage of people. Yeah. It's a very small percentage of people that I believe is, you know what I mean, that fall in my mind into this thing. And it's a very small percentage of people, because I think that, and you were talking about like, what's the mechanism? How would you see this? How would you see somebody get better? You know what I mean? How would you see it? And that like could weed itself up. You know what I mean? Like, you can see it coming. You know what I mean? Like people, narcissistic, you know, folks and people that have, you know, sociopathic tendencies. Like, there is the treatment is not there. Yeah. It's very difficult to just go, okay, you got to change your whole psychology of a person, because it's not just like, you know, people in you know, I was committing crimes. Essentially, what they all boil it down to is to continue to get high, right? Yeah. Well, I know there's a clear path to that. You know what I mean? Like, we have a lot of evidence that shows that you can recover. Most people can recover from substance use disorder, right? So it's not even in the same category, because like the studies show around sociopathic people, therapy makes it worse. Yeah, I don't know. Reversible. It's like it allows somebody to practice their manipulation on another person.
Yeah. And this is a really interesting topic. Like, this is an interesting topic in conversation, because as I'm hearing you talk about this, and in the conversations we've had in the past talking about this too, like I go home and I think to myself, it's also an interesting part of our system that science is like completely absent from our system.
Science is totally ignored from it. So like the science of the human body is completely ignored in any kind of sentencing or any kind. It's either it's a victim of it's crime and punishment. You know what I mean? There's no. It's black and white. It's mathematic in some ways, right? They say, okay, you did this, so you should get right around this range of time. You know what I mean? But the science does not play a factor in any of the decision.
But it should. It should, if you think about it, right? Because I think what you're...
Well, there's like we literally have doctorates in social sciences, right? We have, you know what I mean? Like all this stuff. Like, so like...
We have technology. We have MRI.
We have technology. We have all this stuff. But that's not necessary. It's all a judgment call. Yeah. and it's all based on, you know what I'm saying? So it's not like to get people the proper diagnoses prior to sentencing is like.
Well, it's interesting because even the mechanisms that we do have that, people could argue are scientific about the system, because like I remember when I was waiting to get sentenced, I had to get what was called a PSI, which is a pre-sentence investigation. And I had to meet with a clinical psychologist who had to ask me questions and all these things. And basically that person was gauging, certain quote unquote evidence-based aspects of like my life and my prospects for the future. But like, it's that is what you're talking about, where it's like we're making judgments, right? Like there's a lot of human error possible in that process, but we do have this wide body of actual science that
Like really, you always think about it like this too. It's like if you had the psychologist or whoever comes to see you and like in the jail, and what if that person's having a bad day or fought with the person, their partner on the way over there, spilled coffee on their pants on the way, and then everything is skewed in that way. You know what I mean?
And then, but then we have the opposite. Like you brought up, I never even thought about this specific case. And when you brought up Aaron Hernandez and the whole CTE thing, it actually sent me on like a kind of a spiral, thinking about all the other people in history that maybe if we had examined like their actual brain functionality, that we could figure out that some of the most heinous crimes that are committed in our society are actually done statistically by this percentage of people with a brain malfunction, a brain issue, a deficiency of some kind, versus like we have just these handful of exceptional cases that after people die, we examine their brain and, make these judgment calls. And it started getting me thinking about like, because there are certain things, right? Like you're talking about, certain things that are happening in people's brains, like certain diagnoses, like, we can diagnose somebody as a psychopath and a sociopath. We have the evidence to show what brain activity looks like for that. But that doesn't mean that everybody that commits a heinous crime is those things. Some people have just been so traumatized in their life that it's created, imbalances that are fixable. And so at what point could we infuse into the conversation around, especially when we're talking about heinous crimes, because you also bring up a good point. If we're talking about substance use and substance abuse, and we're talking about petty crimes and, like quote unquote victimless crimes, I'm somebody who struggles with the idea of a victimless crime. But I understand why we say that when there's no physical harm done to somebody, there's no, actual identifiable human victim. But when we're talking, so not like leaving that part to the side, when we're talking about how prison is designed to contain the people who are the most dangerous in society, and we've come up with this categorization that everybody who commits a heinous crime is irredeemable, right? And the fact is that it's not everybody, but there are people who are, because of the reasons that you're bringing up. So why wouldn't we get science involved to actually be able to say, like, you have, like, not even that we're going to explain it to somebody, but like at least.
Well, let me ask you another question. So, is it not like if somebody commits a heinous crime, what we're talking about is the premise that that there is no punishment. They don't deserve punishment for creating the victims that they have, and like right. So like what you're saying, where we're at right now in this moment is that we're saying that everybody's rehabilitatable and that there's no room for punishment in our society.
I don't think it's that there's no room for punishment, because like in my experience, I'll tell you, even just from my life, that the punishment that I received was actually one of the things that prompted the transformation. And some of my best friends who are doing, extreme prison sentences have said that if it wasn't for the element of punishment, I wouldn't have actually looked in the mirror and thought about, it was like my own suffering that prompted me to be able to look at the suffering I had caused. And it's more the idea of like, what do we believe the punishment is, but also what is the end result of the punishment that we seek, right? And so I think punishment has to be an element of crime and wrongdoing. I think like any parent in the world, for the most part, will tell you that punishment is pivotal to development, right? And it's some parents think punishment means punching their kid in the face, and another parent thinks punishment means a 30-second timeout where you don't get to play with your tablet.
Well, I guess for me, like as a parent, I don't necessarily punish my children as a parent. Like I don't necessarily ground my son. You know, he's 14. I don't like ground him. When something comes up in his life, like say he gets in trouble at school, well, that's like if he gets in trouble at home, I feel like he's being punished in two ways for the same thing. You know what I'm saying? Like you know what I mean? Like he gets a bad grade and then he gets punished at home is like two different things. You know what I mean? We talk about accountability. We talk about like I try to coach him up and you know what I mean, and try to get it to him like that. But there's never a mind where I go, oh yeah, I need to punish my son for this thing. I mean, I might see a thing where we have to talk about things or set boundaries and stuff like that. But like punishment isn't part of the way I parent personally. You know what I mean? But if somebody if somebody does something to him, you know, I don't want him to get out of. I don't want him to get out of prison. You know what I'm saying? If somebody hurt him or took his life or something like that, I would not want that person to ever come out of prison. And that's as a parent. You know what I mean? And I think like sometimes like we have a unique thing where we've gotten to know people, the human side of somebody. Not what they did, but the human side of somebody, right? You become friends and you're close to people, and like you could have been in that same situation yourself had a you know, the bullet hit somewhere else or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But like at the end of the day, what lens do we look at this from? And that's where the complexity comes from too, because like somebody over here is going to look at it this way. And who is right? I don't know who's right. All I know is what my feelings are on it. And it's like there are some people that I believe should be punished, and I believe should be in prison for the rest of their lives, or whatever. Like, or I'm different to what happens to them after that. You know what I mean? But for real, I think they should be. I don't think they should probably get out of prison. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a tough conversation, and it's something that like, you know,
is it a tough conversation? So what makes it a tough conversation?
Well,
in my mind,
for me,
is like, well, I just want to say this is that what makes it, is my mind, the only thing that makes it a tough conversation is my fear of how other people will view my perspective on it. You know what I mean? That's it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for me, it's a tough conversation because, like, when I think about, like you named that I have friends who have taken lives and they're, you know, at this point in their life, the best people that I know, and I have to reconcile with the fact that I understand the people that loved the person whose life they took don't believe and will never believe that they deserve to get out of.
Well, maybe they will. You know what I mean? Maybe those.
No,
I think
there are specific instances where I know that they don't.
Right.
And, you know, for me, I've spent a lot of time, probably thousands of hours, you know, trying to reconcile with the fact that I want to be able to empathize with those people because, like, if somebody did something to my child, then that would be the moment where I would have to and it's not something that happens. You don't know in the moment, right? Like, because people have to heal and some people don't, right? Like, I even think
I can empathize with both sides of it. I can empathize with like both sides. I can empathize for the victim, but I can also empathize in some situations for the, you know what I mean? Like the way that.
And that's the part where I think like the beginning of this episode really it makes a difference for me because like if you can tell me that there's a person who killed somebody or, you know, did something heinous to somebody or multiple people and that their prospects for transformation and rehabilitation are none or little to none because they have this, you know, the chemical thing or deficiency in their brain that is uncurable and unhealable, you know, like I guess I can understand. And it's something I've never really thought about till you and I started talking about it. But then there's this other thing where I'm like I want to be in a world one day where we can measure somebody's capability or possibility of transforming. And so not to say that like, oh, they're definitely going to do it because it does take work. And that's one thing that I think you and I both know and agree on is nobody has ever transformed without work. Nobody has ever gone through a comprehensive transformation without grueling blood.
And that's the difference is that are you capable of actually doing the work?
Yeah.
And if you with somebody with sociopathic tendencies is not capable of connecting human emotion to another human emotion,
or experiencing a high level of remorse or regret. And this is really like, flashing back to the initial conversation that you and I had that kind of prompted these episodes is like, I've known people who I've seen fake remorse. I've known people who I've seen not have any remorse, not even be willing to fake it. And I've seen people that have more remorse than they probably even should have. And, to be able to see how those things exist on the spectrum, for me, in my personal life, because I do a lot of work with people who are currently and formerly incarcerated, so I meet people that give me every type of feeling, from the very worst feeling to the very best, most hopeful feeling about humanity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is where my discomfort comes in, and where sometimes I do struggle to really think about or talk about what the right course of action is, because I've met people on the spectrum at every notch that exists. And for me, it's I've had to really confront the fact that, if somebody took somebody I love's life, I know for a fact that my initial feeling would be, fuck you, you deserve to die. Because that person was somebody I loved, and they were special, and they were a light in this world, and you extinguish that light, and you deserve nothing but suffering. But then I also have had these really deep moments where I know people who have done that, and I know that they would never in any circumstances ever hurt somebody again. In fact, they would probably put themselves in harm's way to prevent somebody from getting hurt, because they've gone through this really elite transformation of values and morals and understanding of themselves and the world. And I would hope, and I don't know the answer to this question, and I pray that I never discover the answer to this question, but I would hope that if I was in that situation and I could actually see somebody's humanity and see that you made a mistake, and I understand you and what you went through that made that mistake possible, and I feel so confident that you would never hurt anybody again, that the punishment doesn't need to continue. And I hope I never know that. I hope I never have to be in a situation to make that determination as a victim. But because I have people that I love, man, that I would lay down my life for, to give them a second chance at theirs, it is something I struggle with. You know what I mean? But then what you say is true. I know people that if anybody tried to advocate to me for them, I say, you're out of your fucking mind. That person should never go home, because they don't feel bad, they don't care, and they are a risk to take somebody else's life, whether that's their physical life or their emotional life or whatever. I know people who have 85% of the world fooled that they're this transformed, amazing human being, and I know that they're not. And I don't want them to come home, because I don't want them to hurt somebody else. It's it feels like an impossible question for me to answer sometimes. You know what I mean? What is the pathway to determining? And this is what we've talked about.
The reality is that there isn't a pathway, and that's not what our reality is. It's not what our system is. This is all what, you know what I mean? This is all what could happen if this was going on, right? But the reality is that we are in a system that's creates more trauma, and that's going to make conditions worse at times for some people. You know what I mean?
And do you think that that's one of the answers? Not a concrete answer to the question, but do you think that's one of the answers to these bigger questions, which is maybe more people would be more transformable in the entire field
if the system was different than it is now, or you had a Norwegian sort of model where there's yes, absolutely. I think that no matter what, whether this person can be transformed, this, that, and not, but if they're introduced to genuine love in their life, it's gotta diminish. I really believe it would diminish the symptoms of it. Is it going to go away? Is it going to make the person less of a risk? No, but is it going to make the environment that they're in and everybody else safer around them? Yes. Should they be in society? No, right? Like, so it's like, that's what I was coming back to. It's like this quality of life thing, right? Like, people can have like a decent life and not be like tortured and like unsafe while they're do you know what I mean? But do they have to be around here? And like, in consideration of like victims, you can't just go like that discounts like the life sentence that they have to serve. You know what I'm saying?
Man, it's interesting because like this whole topic, like the Norwegian model, and like the whole topic of the difference between like prisons in different parts of the world. Like, there are prisons in Scandinavian countries where mass murderers, people who committed a mass shooting, they go to prison and it's not a life sentence. They don't have constitutionally, statutorily, they don't have the ability to give somebody a life sentence. And like, for me, what I wonder about is what is it that makes a society like that believe the opposite of what we're talking about, which is that even these like really horrible, like irreversible conditions can still be reversed somehow. Because I am of the belief that there are some people who, no matter what type of environment you put them in and no matter what you introduce them to, they can't change. They will never change, right? But we do have societies that have, in some ways demonstrated that that might not necessarily be the case. But the interesting thing is those societies also have like 5% of the violent crime that the United States has, right? So like, those are countries where like they've had like 2 mass shootings in 200 years, and we had 600 and something last year. So like, we have these huge societal differences, not just with our system of punishment.
It's also relation. There's also a lot less people in these areas,
and also a lot less structural violence and historical violence.
It's like we have a complex society, complex country. You know what I'm saying?
And a really complex history too, and that's something that gets talked about a lot, and maybe gets talked about enough. But I'm not sure people really, have unpacked it to understand that we live in a country that was formed. It was literally formed in bloodshed and violence and racism and sexism and all of these things. And they say that the biggest predictor of somebody's capability to commit violence is their previous exposure to violence. Mm-hmm. That very rarely do people.
And so let's say that for a second. We're talking about like the psychology and stuff. So like when we were down in Virginia, we went to we were at Busch Gardens down there, and there was nobody there, if you remember right, and we probably went on 25 roller coaster rides, right? Like 25 roller coaster. And these things ain't just roller coaster rides. I mean, these things were like, feel like you're in a rocket ship. You know what I'm saying? You don't know what's gonna happen next. It was wild, right? And then we all not only did it like usually you're a theme park like that, you get 4 or 5 rides for the whole day because the lines are there. But we probably went on 25 roller coaster rides, right? Now, what the endorphins and the some people don't like roller coaster rides. Some people hate the shit because it does something different for you. You're crazy. You know what I'm saying? You're like just keep going, right? Like we get some keep going. I'm like, it's like hard, right? But like we keep going for a reason, right? Because there's something like being released, right?
Satisfied for us, yeah.
So let me ask you this: you go to like, Funtown in Maine, you go on that rickety old roller coaster over there, and you're like, there's no real comparison to the two things. And the reason I say that is because the chemicals that have been released into your brain at that point on these other ones, like when we're in Busch Gardens, is a lot more than what was over there.
It's almost like that's what you want. You're craving that one.
Of course, you're gonna try. You're like, I'm not going here. I'm going there. So what I'm trying to say is like once your brain has gone to a certain point, it doesn't forget that it's been there. It actually craves it more. You see what I'm saying?
You lost me at first, but you found me again. Like I do understand the comparison.
So you go to this it's like you do this little thing right here that doesn't give you much exhilaration. Now because you've experienced this other thing over here, you've crossed the line.
So let me ask you this though, because now I'm thinking about that kind of comparison, and I'm thinking about bringing it over into the world of crime and justice and punishment, and so like if I'm going through that and I'm like wondering to myself, like, why do I not want to go on this rickety old roller coaster anymore? And I develop a deep understanding of exactly what you're talking about, and I actually begin to understand, like, oh man, when I went on that roller coaster, it released this and it did this to me psychologically, emotionally. It fulfilled these pleasure pathways, and and once I start to understand it, can I get to a point where I'm like, okay, now I can have fun on the Excalibur?
Yes, if you can, but the problem is that we're talking about the path now, the other side of it. Now that's what happens to the brain. But what about the pathology of it? You know what I'm saying? What about the person that can't see that, like, this process is actually happening for me, and it's all just about fulfilling the need?
Yeah, they'll never even consider understanding,
because it's not there. That part of the brain is short circuited.
And they won't even return to the Busch Gardens roller coaster. They have to find the next.
I'm going to the next one.
And then what happens when there is no next one?
It gets deeper and deeper and deeper.
I understand that comparison when we're talking about kind of crime, because there are people, like we started talking about.
Crime is literally like when I was committing crime, when I was doing this stuff, it was exhilarating. There was it was a release. The lifestyle was different. You know what I mean? Like, the lifestyle was part of the problem too. You know what I mean? Like, so you get out of prison and you haven't really learned anything new. What do you do when you get out?
You chase
You literally go back to what you know lots of ways. If you haven't tried, or you haven't tried to receive treatment or help, or like you haven't gotten the right help, or you haven't got the right, whatever it is, right? So, so how do you determine that? Like, when does it start? When does it end? When do you go, okay, like, you know what I mean?
It's interesting, because I would love for people that are listening to this, like, maybe we just got a little too abstract, and you got to listen to this 2 or 3 times to really, like, because I'm going to be thinking about this like my whole drive.
I don't think so. And really, it's like the neurotransmitter. Like, so even when I was, well, you think about authority, right? And when I was growing up, like, I lost, like, any kind of feeling for it. Like, I didn't, like, because I had started, okay, boom, I got in the back of the first cop car, and then it was like I was nervous and scared, and then I was in there the next day. You know what I mean? I get punished, and it wasn't like, it lost its luster because I stopped, like, and so, like, by the time I started getting into with cops and the prison system and stuff like that, the fear of, or any kind of emotional, like, I didn't care. I lost, like, desensitized to it. You know what I'm saying? So if you repeatedly do this certain behavior in your life, and you get a neurological reward for it in your brain, you're just gonna stop doing that. You know what I mean? Especially if you can't own it, you can't look at it, you can't see it, or you blame everybody else, or like you like, literally your brain won't let you admit that it happened. You know what I mean?
I mean, it's interesting, because the more I hear you talk about it, and the more I hear you talk about, like, the actual pathology of these things, and how reward centers in your brain are firing off through certain behaviors, and I'm thinking, the more that we talk about that, I'm thinking about, like, okay, so how is it reversible from the smallest to the biggest? And, one thing that's kind of sitting with me is something that you said earlier about, like, if we did have an environment that was more, therapeutic and more based in, like, dignity and, like, recognizing humanity and love, like, people get uncomfortable about the idea of what love could mean in, like, a prison setting. And we have, like, all these, feelings about how, like, people don't need love, they need responsibility and accountability and this. But, like, to me, that's what love is. If I love somebody, if I'm going to treat somebody with love and dignity and respect, that means I'm also going to be honest with them. And so I envision, like, what would a system look like? And I have all these ideas about a system that did have more love involved, and had some punishment, and had some accountability, and had some honesty, because all of those are elements of, like, radical love to me. And so if we had an environment where even the worst of the worst people were being met with love, and still, like, they were in an environment that recognized their dignity, they were in an environment that was inundated with love and gave them the opportunity to transform, and they still resisted, then we would have a better idea that, like, what you're talking about is probably true. Like your pathways and
you can say, okay, we need to get this person more help. You know what I mean? Like this is not working, so let's try this.
and then maybe
Let's try
where
this.
we understand that no amount of help is actually going to change.
You just keep working on it until it does or it doesn't. You know
And
what I mean?
that's exactly the point that I'm making. And so maybe there are folks that like if we treated everybody with humanity and dignity in the attempt to recognize that there's a possibility of transformation, it doesn't mean that we're guaranteeing everybody's transformable, but like as humans and as a system that is,
We're gonna monitor that situation.
and we're going to continue we're going to continue to keep people safe, but we're also going to continue to give them the opportunity to recognize the error in their ways and their thinking and their feelings and their, in their pathology. And maybe there is a system where it's like, eventually we say, hey, you are incapable of transforming because we've given you every chance to, and you've pushed back on it. And so like, you do have to be separated from society, but that doesn't mean we're going to torture you, and we're going to, we're actually going to treat you with dignity and respect. And that's an interesting thought in and of itself that I don't think I ever really thought of in that way. But to come back to what you said, it requires radical honesty. It requires radical accountability. And if somebody is given the opportunity to do that and still refuses to, in a place that's non-judgmental and overly punitive and non-torturous, and they still can't get to that point, I don't want that person around me.
Right. And on a personal level, so I can, that's good from over there. I don't want to, you know what I mean? Like, there's still personal beliefs that, like, we have to get around. Like, I have to get around, you know what I mean?
No, that's without a doubt. I mean, it's one thing, like, we talk about, we live in a society where, there's, like, almost kind of two types of people, and it's, like, one type of person expresses those really, personal beliefs that are kind of off-putting to people because they get a rise out of it, right? And other people recognize them and sit with them, but like don't want to make people uncomfortable by expressing them. And the truth is, we all, for the most part, have those belief systems. I'm full of them because of my experience in prison and because of my experience in the work I've done since prison, that I do have beliefs that I am afraid, and you named this earlier, I'm afraid to express them because they're probably unpopular with certain segments of people, but they are deep rooted in me because of my experiences, right? And that's something to explore in future conversations too, is how
because we don't want to hurt people's feelings and stuff like that. And I think when we look at it in that context, it's not helpful. But when we look at it in a way of like, how can we help everybody, and how can we be on the same page, and like without discounting like people's personal beliefs, and being like, there's a lot of victims out here. There's the people, like a lot of men and women that are incarcerated right now have been victims of sexual abuse and sexual violence, and I think it makes it very, very difficult to be incarcerated with people after you've experienced that much emotional pain and anguish, and then to be incarcerated next to people that have perpetrated that, and then to try to support them, or like be like, okay, we're on the same. That's a difficult thing for a lot of people to do. As a matter of fact, like having these conversations in a way that's like, okay, I can name it now, I can talk about it now, I can have this conversation with you. 15, 20 years ago, we're not having, like, it's not, like, so for me personally, I've had a lot of progress around this, and I can start seeing it for what it is. And in our treatment center, I want people to get well. We don't tell people they can't come to treatment because they have, a certain thing, on their record or anything like that. We want everybody to receive treatment. We want everybody to get well, you know what I mean? But I just have personally, I've been growing around it. Yeah. Like I think I've been growing. You know what I mean? And I still have strong views. I've come on.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing: is I haven't. My go-to when we used to be programmed is like the derogatory remarks.
Oh,
you know what I'm saying? Like that's the first thing. Boom, boom, and it's like
there's no gray area.
It's not, and that's the part of myself that I'm trying to work through. You know what I mean? And like, and part of it's like, I know a lot of my friends what their views are on it, and so I almost feel like I'm like, they have their opinions. I know it. Like it's started to change. Where like I want to see everybody get. Well, I don't want to hurt people. You know what I'm saying? Like, and you go, okay, that applies to everybody. You know what I mean?
Well, it's interesting because like I can name that I am in a place and I'm a person who wants to believe in the transformability. I don't even know if that's a word, but like I want to believe that every person is redeemable. I want to. I don't. I can say that. I want to.
And I don't think there's anybody. I mean, I think you would have like, and I think our perspective is different. I think if you've done time in a carceral system in the United States, I haven't met one person that's done that would say everybody is transformed. Everybody,
and that's
I don't think
the truth.
Maybe there is, and I maybe, but like I haven't met one person
I haven't
that has done time behind the walls and saw how things have gone down, and then you go, oh yeah, I think everybody
should come out. Yeah, no, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I don't know.
And if there is somebody that believes that, I would love to like hit a comment or something to like talk to us about it, because I would love to hear that side of it too. Like, what does that look like? You know what I mean?
And I would also just encourage, anybody who's listening to these episodes, like look up our social media if you've heard something, on Instagram, Behind the Door Maine, on Facebook, Behind the Door, and on TikTok, I think it's Behind the Door, and comment on the content from these episodes on the reels, because we do want that feedback. Like, let us know. Do you think everybody's redeemable? Do you think every single person, regardless of the harms that they've committed, is somebody who can be transformed? Because I think the only way to actually further our understanding about this is to continue to have conversations and open up space for other views that are respectful. You know what I mean?
I'm also willing, like I'm willing to be educated. And I'm for sure have a conversation and stuff like that, because that this piece of it's not accountable for me. Sometimes it's just like I said, to be like how people will see me after I say certain things.
And then I think really for me, like the theme that has kind of rose out of this conversation and this episode specifically is like, this is the way what we just did, right? Like, having different feelings, agreeing on some things and disagreeing on other things, but being willing to talk about them is really the only pathway that I see to creating the healthy system that we, envision talking about, that maybe could make like a significant difference compared to what we have now. But it's a thing that doesn't exist, right? People in positions of power, people in positions of authority within our structure and our system, they're not wanting to learn. They're not willing to engage. They're very deeply rooted in their beliefs, and there's no convincing them otherwise. And they'll tell you why. And, it's like they're immovable. And what I've learned in this conversation, what I hope people listen and take away from it, is that it's these type of conversations where it's okay to say, man, I don't know. And what do you think? And actually have genuine curiosity to hear what somebody else has to think, even if their opinion is the complete opposite of yours, to give them space to actually explain why, because that's when we learn about each other. That's when we learn about how to forge the pathway forward. So I always appreciate these conversations, man. It's been another good one. I hope everybody listening, feels the same way and enjoyed this conversation, and especially the roller coaster analogy specifically, because like I was on a roller coaster for that. And then I got to the end and I understood the ride that I was on. So I appreciate you for unpacking that. And, subscribe, like, link, listen, spread the word, Behind the Door podcast, and keep tuning in. We got, more tough conversations to come and more guests that hopefully will just continue to inspire everybody. But as always, Jeremy, man, I thank you for, for your ability to have these conversations and, the present, because I'm always learning from you, man. So, yeah, I appreciate you.
Appreciate me. Thank you so much.